His whole career was built on relationships.
I don't know if the odds were on either one of us to be able to get this far, but like maybe we beat the over-under that they had for us in Vegas.
Pat can be brutally honest, and sometimes that doesn't help in politics.
Many people have been here for a long time. I mean, and the reason is because of the way Mr. Gallagher treats his people.
Good evening, everybody, and welcome to PGT Tonight. I'm your host, as always, Thomas Mann, and tonight we have a very special episode for you as we are celebrating 45 years of PGT Trucking. That's right, 45 years, which in business is impressive. In trucking, that's even more impressive. And in late-night talk show years, that means we'd already be running reruns. Tonight, we'll be looking at the story behind the company from the people who helped build it and the legacy that Pat Gallagher has built over the last 4.5 decades. I had the pleasure of sitting down with some people that had a front row seat to it all, the good times, the challenges, and all the moments that helped shape PGT today. This story deserves a spotlight, so sit back, settle in, and enjoy the show. Let's roll the tape. Take me back to the beginning. When did you first meet Pat Gallagher?
Well, Pat was about 12 years old, and his father had the truck line. It was one of our main carriers at Crucible Steel.
Well, the first time I met Pat, I believe it was at the Paul Evans golf outing. This goes back to probably the early 90s.
In April of 1987.
The relationship with Hill International or OS Hill actually started prior, obviously, to me being on board, but the relationship started with Jack Hill, and Jack sold his father trucks, Pat's father trucks.
It was very early in the 1980s. I want to say could have been like 1980-ish, 80, 82, something like that.
So after growing up in the trucking industry, was this a passion of his from the start?
Every Friday, he would come down to the mill, and we used to have a big spread there with donuts. And he'd sit and have a donut, and in about 15 minutes, his dad would call, where's Pat? Where is that little guy? I said, Bob, I don't know. Is he supposed to be here? Well, he's there to get to Chet. Where's that little son of a gun? And Pat would be sitting there with the donut, powder all over. That's just relax.
When was it that everything changed for him?
He came to see me, and he says, I'm going to run the company. And I think Pat probably at that time was maybe 19 years old. I might not be exact on that. And I was the old sage, and I said, Pat, you can't. You got to stay in school, you know. And he said, B, my dad didn't have any insurance, and I have 3 brothers. And he says, so I have to run the company.
And then Pat went out on his own, and Pat and Jack got together, and they kind of hit it off.
Pat was the kind of guy that I always suspected was going to be what he's become. I mean, he was always forward-looking. He had a knack for people, for business.
And you knew that how motivated Pat was to turn that business into something that everybody would be proud of.
Jack supported Pat in the early years, and Pat never forgot that, helped him with co-signing for the first few trucks that he bought until he could get his credit. And back then, the interest rates were unbelievably high. So that was a challenge for anybody that wanted to get started.
Wow, that does sound challenging. I mean, starting a company, let alone in the trucking business, must not have been easy, right?
In those days, trucking was a bunch of cowboys. But he was able to handle them. I mean,
the early days were so difficult. I mean, it was tough. You had just a few trucks.
People would tell me they would put cardboard on the floor to keep the wind from blowing in. The engine was right below you, so in the summertime you sat right over top of the motor, so it was extremely hot in there.
Back in the 80s, I mean, the environment was totally different. It was a very regulated industry.
And he was always looking for employees, looking for drivers, training those drivers, trying to make them happy so that they would stay with the company on a long-term basis.
It was a difficult burden to do. So it was very tough to get into trucking, and especially to expand it back in those days.
Yeah. personal relationships have always been a huge thing for him. How do you think that drives the way he runs the company?
He gave him his word. I mean, if he said, I'm going to make sure you get loads on Monday, he would fulfill that. And I could say 20 trucks tomorrow morning. He said, you'll have them. And when I hung up, I didn't have to worry about it. I could get on to something else.
Can you share a story that captures his personality?
We were playing basketball in the YMCA gym, and I had played basketball. I played at college level and things, and I was on his team, and he was telling me what to do. So that's how we met. He was trying to tell me to play better defense. Yeah.
I had an opportunity, and this was 2001, to go and work in the NFL. So I called Pat and I asked him, he said, don't even think twice about it. He says, I know the passion you have for officiating. You go and do what you need to do. And that story, that made me want to even work harder for Mr. Gallagher, because he didn't even think about it. He said, Paul, you go do, I know what your passion is, and just go do it. And that, again, that's the kind of thing that he does with his people, is he gives them an opportunity to be successful, not just here at PGT, but successful in life.
After 45 years, what comes to mind when you think about Pat and PGT Trucking?
As you look back on it, sometimes you think like, boy, can't believe we got this far, And sometimes Pat and I will look at each other and we'll talk about that and say, yeah, I don't know if the odds were on either one of us to be able to get this far, but like maybe we beat the over/under that they had for us in Vegas. But that was it. Yeah, it's been a great ride.
Awesome. People need to know that he's worked for everything he has. He's one of the generation that started with one truck and had a vision and worked to get where he is today. So I don't think anything was handed to Pat.
What a story. Well, that's all the time we have for this special edition of PGT Tonight. As always, thank you for being here. I'm Thomas Mann, and we will see you next time.